Welcome to Martial Wisdom. Here you can listen to conversations on all kinds of topics related to martial arts. In today's episode, Colonel Todd Hulsey comes on the show and we talk about reimagining the dojo and how we train. You've probably noticed that episodes have not been coming out as frequently as they have in the past. This is from a combination of things, but I still love putting this material out for all of you. I wish there were more hours in the day. I'm still adding videos every week to the Spirit Aikido online program, which now has over 350 videos. In the latest series, I covered an initial response, which is useful for a wide variety of attacks. The purpose is to eliminate the confusion over how to respond by making the decision process simple and fast. I show a number of different endings and options to train and experiment with, all of which are simple and high percentage. I encourage you to check it out. My profound thanks to those who have subscribed to the program and those who have contributed to the PayPal tip jar. I hope you enjoy this episode. Now, on with the discussion. All right, I'm welcoming back my friend Colonel Todd Hulsey back to the podcast. It's been a while. We had a great chat, I think, last year, and he came to me and posed kind of a question. We got to chatting a little bit about what if you were to start your own dojo, or what if you want to reimagine how you go about your training. We all inherit our martial art from our instructors, and we tend to fall into the process of passing along what we were taught as best we can remember it, and probably missing a few things here and there, to our students. And within there's usually a little bit of signal loss. There's a little bit of reinterpretation. And this is our discussion is on how you would go about making sure that as you're going along, not only you're learning as a martial artist, but you're learning as a teacher and an instructor how to be a better teacher, how to convey information, effective things to your students better, to make sure they're well-rounded martial artists. And so welcome back to the show, Todd. I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Thanks, Tristan. I appreciate you having me on again. And I don't know if it was last year or 2 years ago we recorded that episode, but I'll try to remember what we talked about then to bring it.
It's been a while and a lot has passed since then. So I am at a loss to come up with exactly what we talked about, but I do recall enjoying the discussion. And
likewise.
For our listeners, Todd and I are in contact periodically where we'll exchange a few messages or emails or just chat a little bit. I really like talking with him. And by the way, a little plug, he's got his own podcast. Maybe you could mention that, and if people are interested, they can go check that out.
Yeah, it's called the Dirt Wasp podcast, and it deals mostly in military and martial arts related subjects, but it's not exclusive to that. So there's about 93 episodes up, and I invited everyone to look it up on however they listen to their podcasts, and just go through the catalog of episodes and see if anything strikes their fancy and give it a listen.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, Todd's always great to talk with. He's got some thought-provoking ideas and experiences, so it's great to get that, which is why I was so excited about this episode. So let's dig into this. Reimagining the dojo, or reimagining your training. We kind of came at this with the idea of looking at, well, what if you were going to set up your dojo or a practice group for the first time, from scratch, starting from zero? How would you go about it, or what would you do to, not so much the marketing side necessarily, although we can talk about that later, but how would you format your training? How would you go about setting, okay, what are we going to train? What martial art are you going to train, or how are you going to train your martial art? Would you do it the way that you learned it exclusively, or would you look at other arts, other instructors to bring in influences that would improve upon the way that you were taught? I've always felt that no matter what you get, it's not perfect. It's not flawless. It could always stand to be improved. And we as students are exactly the same way. We are not perfect. We are not flawless. As instructors, same thing. There's always room for improvement. And I think this is one thing that becomes a burden on martial arts, is that they can become stale. When all they do is kind of rehash what they've always done, they tend to get the training gets lackluster. It has holes in it that are never really addressed or noticed, or they're kind of glossed over, so nobody pays much attention to them. And arts over time get to be more and more specialized, where the
their scope gets narrowed down gradually, almost unnoticeably over time, and that can be kind of an issue. So when you look at doing a new dojo, now you start almost with a blank canvas, which is nice because you can say, all right, I'm in charge of this now. I can kind of do whatever I want. But that can also be scary when you say, well, but do you know enough to put a comprehensive curriculum together and a plan when you don't have a blueprint? And the blueprint is what you inherited from your instructor, who, that's kind of the easy way to get drawn into the what do they call it, the telephone game of the signal degradation over time.
Right.
So um, so yeah, let's talk a little about that, because I think you would pose that question of what would you do if you started your own dojo or practice group, and how would you go about it? So what are your thoughts on getting started, or thoughts, questions, or kind of wherever you're at?
Well, if we leave aside the real estate space that one would need for that, because those are big considerations,
Absolutely.
uh, next would be which martial art are you going to teach? And just for the
Mhm.
audience's,
Mhm.
edification, really the only martial art that I'm qualified to teach is firearms.
Mhm.
But I've been a lifelong dabbler in various martial arts, and I
Mhm.
I think that one that the first consideration is which martial arts are you going to a martial art are you going to feature.
Mhm.
And I think it's okay to have one school that teaches more than one style of martial art, as long as you have the instructors competent to teach the different styles. And certainly we
Absolutely.
know of people who
Mhm.
can teach Brazilian Jiu Jitsu and then can teach Muay Thai at the same time, because they're
Mhm.
qualified to do that. So the qualification of the instructor is also very important, but I think you really have to start with which martial art are you going to feature. And,
Absolutely.
and as we spoke before you hit the record button, for example, I mean, if I could in my area, I would uh, create an Aikido dojo.
Mhm.
I'm not qualified to teach, but I would own it and then be a student there.
Sure.
And
Now,
and
what
again,
makes you choose Aikido? That's interesting, of having that your interest in it, without necessarily your background. So obviously Aikido is intriguing to you. So share with your thoughts on your interest in
yeah, yeah.
sponsoring an
I mean,
Aikido book, essentially.
well, Aikido, for some reason, it speaks to me.
Hmm.
Let me not to get religious, but like I'm Roman Catholic, but
Hmm.
the service that for some reason I cannot articulate why that speaks to me the most is the Presbyterian service, the high service where the minister wears vestments. For some reason, that speaks to me uh,
Hmm.
in ways no other denomination service does. Although my wife and I go to Catholic church, um, but still, it speaks to me in a way. Aikido speaks to me in a way I cannot articulate. Now, my
Hmm.
first martial art was judo. I
Hmm.
think judo is the most awesome martial art that there is.
It is
But
pretty amazing.
it's pretty amazing. When and I did it in college. I think I'm too old now. I'll be 60 in a couple of months, and
Hmm.
I just simply don't recover from throws and stuff like that anymore. I mean, I was 20 when I was, or 22, 21, 22, 23 when I was doing it. It's a big difference from being,
Hmm.
60 years old. Having said that, when I was studying judo, the judoka would talk about when they reached a certain level that they wanted to reach in judo, that they would get the quote PhD in martial arts,
Hmm.
close quote. They would learn Aikido. And I
Hmm.
think it always stuck with me to hearing these people, brown belts and black belts, talk about Aikido that way. And then also in the 1980s, and I don't know if it had anything to do with Steven Seagal or it came from some other place, police Aikido was a real thing.
Hmm.
And we have to remember Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, nobody that had barely gotten here. I mean, if you weren't in Torrance, California or its vicinity, you never heard of Brazilian Jiu Jitsu before.
Hmm.
And it just wasn't around. You can get it, virtually every street corner today, but nobody heard of it then, and it was police Aikido, a very specific thing, which is a martial art that the Japanese police still practice to this day.
Hmm.
So and it does have applications there. And then I studied Aikido twice in the past, and it just speaks to me in some way. Now, there's also the consideration of marketplace, because there is an Aikido school, if you want to call it that, that is within convenient driving distance of my house, but it's at a community center, and which is nothing wrong with that, but it's not a that's not a martial arts school per se. So it's in the back room,
Hmm.
where people would otherwise do aerobics or something,
Hmm.
and it's not a real martial arts school. So we're talking about a martial arts school. So I would look at Aikido not only because I have a particular personal interest in it, which I can't
Hmm.
well articulate, and
Hmm.
because it's not available in my marketplace. And it
Hmm.
could very well, and it could very well, that alone, offering something that's not offered locally, could mean
Sure.
more people would come through the door to try it. So I
Hmm.
think figuring out which martial arts you want to feature, um, is step one
Hmm.
in the process. What do you think?
It is, and especially even not only the art specific, but what you want to teach and what your experience as the instructor or the owner you want to have. Having started a dojo myself, I learned a bunch of lessons, and if I had to do it over again, I wouldn't have done it exactly the way that I did it. Um, and so those some interesting lessons. One of which is, like you said, is the renting the space. It's easy to spend money and rent a space and now be worried about filling it.
Right.
Um, with the art that you chose, and I want to jump to this before we move on, which is the police aikido, and that reminds me that an instructor in my lineage, Bill Sosa, from down in he was in Texas. He wrote a book on the secrets of police aikido, was the title of the book, but he took aikido and actually taught it to law enforcement with the intention of this is how a police officer might use it for restraint, for apprehension, arrest, that sort of thing. And so I don't know. I never got to meet him personally because he passed away before I started, but I inherited his lessons from his students about that side of aikido. Now I don't know what his exposure was to the like Japanese police law enforcement training of aikido that they did over in Japan, or if he just took the lessons to from his side of where he learned aikido, which he was from Koichi Tohei and Isao Takahashi sensei. They were I know what more about Tohei than Takahashi, but and then of course Bill Sosa was big. He was a Golden Gloves boxer, so he had a lot of practical live fight type experience and wanted his aikido to fit against that type of environment. And so he made that kind of work. And he was a very special instructor. Everybody that has trained with him has remarked about his level of talent, and not just as a martial artist, but as an instructor. So I like the police application. And this is one of those things where, as you start a dojo and whether you choose your art and what you present to attract students, I think is very important. Do you want to train them to be sport martial artists, like competitors? Do you want to train them to be study the art for its own sake, like things like memorizing katas and learning the choreography and learning the technical precision, almost like a dancer learns their dance or a musician learns their music, which is fine on itself? Or do you want to train them to be, if something goes down, you want to train them to see that they have their best chance of survival? Because those are all three very different realms. Um, and I would
Well,
say, as an instructor, figure out which realm you are focusing on, because that will have a profound effect on how you train your students, what you train them, and within even different arts. This is not Aikido specific. This could be somebody at a Jeet Kune Do school, or a Muay Thai school, or anything in between. Likewise, I've got a judo instructor at my dojo, and he's an older guy. He's been training judo since I was in kindergarten, back in the early 70s, and he is amazing. But he because of his age, teaches mostly students who are middle age and older who still want to do judo, but they can't hold up to the competitive Olympic style judo where there's ballistic throws because their bodies just can't handle it anymore. But that's where judo gets into that PhD level. Do you have the control where you can control somebody down rather than just blowing them out? And more what I would call the Kyuzumifune judo, that super subtle, ultra level control, almost like you don't see anything happening and then suddenly somebody's on the ground.
Yeah.
He had that sublime level. And whenever I watch him, I think like that's what I want my Aikido to be. So powerful, but subtle, absolutely perfect energy management. Like you never see him having to work hard. It's just amazing. That's what I see. And that's also where I see judo and Aikido so close together because their principles are the same. Taking balance, getting somebody to the ground, managing your efficiency, staying on your feet if you can. All of those things to me are universal to the two arts. And I think sumo comes in there as well as an influence, as does jujitsu. I mean, because if you look at it, they're all technically jujitsu if you go back far enough of what jujitsu was called in the 1800s. But I think as an instructor, and you say, okay, well, what is it I want to teach? What do I want to? What are the students that I want to gather? What would they be interested in? Because now you start branching into the marketing side, where you say you put up your sign and you say, okay, come on in and learn, and people be like, well, what am I learning? Well, you need an answer to that question, or you need to put it out there so that you attract the right students. And one of the things that I can articulate of what I like about Aikido is it does not tend to attract the 20-something young men who want to learn to hurt people. It does not attract people that want to learn to be combat monsters, that want to survive by causing as much damage to other people as they humanly can. And right now and I'd say the last probably 15 years, the combatives realm of the martial arts has gotten much more popular, and I've trained that too. It's a hole you need to fill of that. What happens in maximum violence? But I've always found that you have to be careful of how you advertise that because you can attract students that will hurt each other on a regular basis, and it's hard to have a school when all your students are injured and aren't coming to class.
Yeah.
And so that's a factor as well, I think, of who you attract and what you want them to ultimately be. And I would put things like Krav Maga was one of the first real combatives arts that emerged, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, became real popular on the kind of the average Joe public guy said, yeah, I want to be able to just utterly turn into a berserker and go do as much damage as possible in the shortest amount of time. That sounds really good. To me, that is often the interest in the combatives stuff. And there's other schools of combatives that have emerged that are very popular right now based on that. And I admire them. I like those things. I've learned a lot of it too. But it's also one of those things where very few real self-defense situations call for that level of violence. And if you uncork that when it's not appropriate, you can get in real trouble. Whether it's after the fact or even the fact of, just an inappropriate response. Civilized people don't want to overwhelm somebody with violence. That's just not how peaceful people tend to work. And so I think that there's quite a few people that are turned off by that kind of a military approach to martial arts. And I think, to me, Aikido is a civilian application of a martial art, which is focused on an appropriate response and a measured response to a particular threat. And that might be a low-level threat. Somebody might put their hand on your shoulder and start trying to intimidate you. Well, does that, now call for throat punching and eye gouging? Well, no, it doesn't. But you got to do something. So to me, that's where, and my instructors would always say, Aikido is an unusual art, if not almost unique, in the fact that there's a variable dial of how much you choose to respond. You can respond at a 1 or 2 level, or you can turn it all the way up to 9 or 10 if it needs to be. And I would say judo and jujitsu are like that too. That's why those arts are so close together. But the idea of speaks to me anyway, is a civilian art practiced by peaceful people who want to understand and be fluent in the language of violence without going over the line, without turning themselves into the very thing that they don't want to be, which is some kind of a monster. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, and I have there's a lot of things we've covered. You've covered a lot of ground, so it leaves me
Yeah, yeah.
a lot of, if I don't get tackled, some broken field running to do here. So, first of all, you know what BJJ really stands for, don't you?
What's that?
Basically, just judo.
That's a new one. That new one to me. I love it though.
You've
I
never
like
heard
it.
that before? Okay.
I've never
Well,
heard
anyway,
that.
I couldn't resist without throwing that one out there. And by the way, although I haven't in a couple of years due to my current arthritis battle, but I've studied BJJ and I love it. I think it's awesome with capital letters. Now let's go back to, and I want to say something else. I'm going to start with what we just covered, and then go back and move forward again. Now, look, I'm a retired guard colonel, true and well enough. I'm also a retired FBI agent. And on top of that, I'm also a lawyer. And at one time, I was a prosecutor. The danger of the combatives training, and it's not the training itself, I'm talking mindset. And it's usually young men who are beset with this mindset, but they want to be able to have the skills to be able to just, go unleashed on somebody and leave the attacker in a smoking pile of rubble. Well, I'm going to tell you that quite often leads to jail. If let's say so somebody punches another person, they fall down, just one punch, fall down, hit their head and die. What do you call that?
The one punch death?
Well, it's manslaughter at the very least. And there's usually in most states going to be a prison sentence attached to that. And if it's done with malice and not in self-defense, then that's a murder charge. If you're defending yourself and it's a legitimate self-defense encounter, you accidentally kill somebody and it has not elevated to a deadly force situation, that is by definition manslaughter. So people, ought to be very careful. And I will say in the same veins, what most martial arts schools never talk about is the legal landscape that we all operate under, whether we like it or not. We all operate on legal terrain, and we have to know what the laws of self-defense are in our respective jurisdictions. That's one thing that most martial arts schools, I don't care what they teach, don't even talk about. And the second thing is proportionality of force, because the law of self-defense requires proportionality of force. If somebody is in a position to use deadly force against you and they're the attacker and you're the defender, then it becomes a deadly force situation, which allows you to apply deadly force in self-defense. But an assault is an unwanted touching. Some states even have assault by threat. You don't have to touch somebody, or you can call somebody a bad name, and that would be considered an assault. But an unwanted touching, battery. I'm sorry. So if somebody just to poke you in the chest, well, legally that's battery, and it's also assault. So assault and battery, and then you break the person's face based on them simply poking you in the chest with their finger is not proportionality of force, and there could be an arrest that follows that. Obviously, every situation is different. Many situations are complex. The law is applied to the facts, not a blanket situation that somebody dreamed up. But most martial arts schools don't talk about those two things in any way at all. Which if the school teaches something that they bill as self-defense, then to me it's incumbent upon them to also touch upon these subjects, even if they need to bring a lawyer in to explain it. Now, going back to the beginning, we're talking about which martial art to teach. We need to talk about what the definition of martial arts is. I have a particular definition for martial arts. Not everybody agrees with it, but martial is derived from the name Mars, the Roman god of war. And arts has been taken as being artistic as in dancing. And I don't believe that that's really what the English translation of it means. It's more, in my mind, artisan. Well, what is an artisan? A skilled craftsman. So if you reduce martial arts to a definition, it's fighting skill. And I think if somebody is going to teach anything that is called martial arts, that the result ought to be that the student learns fighting skill. And I think this is one of the downfalls of Aikido generally when we're talking about commercial Aikido dojos, is talking about, well, Aikido is the peaceful martial art. To me, that's an oxymoron. You cannot have a peaceful fighting skill. May be peaceful until it's time to employ those skills. What's the saying? It's be a warrior in the garden and not a gardener in a war. That's more of the mindset. I think when we talk about teaching fighting skill, be the warrior in the garden. You can be peaceful until it is required to become a warrior.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that that's an important part of how do you appeal to students and you do, in my opinion, you do that with clarity. You have perfect clarity about what you are, what you're teaching, and what you're going to teach them to be. And the art of peace thing kind of always bothered me, because there's the inherent contradiction that you just pointed out. I've seen it taken to the point where peace might be the ultimate goal, but peace is not the process by which you get that goal. And this is where I think what you hit on is it's important to understand, which is it's kind of if you want an omelet, you may need to break a few eggs to get there. Now, you want to break as few as possible. You don't want to do them in an explosive fashion that makes it so you can't make the omelet anymore. Likewise, if in a civilian environment, you want to bring control to a chaotic situation with the minimal amount of injury possible. To me, that's the definition. And there's a priority list. You want to protect yourself and innocent people and the attacker, kind of in that order. And if the third priority doesn't get met, kind of, well, you did your best you could, but optimally you want to have no injury to anybody and the circumstance, peace restored to the situation. But before that peace gets restored, there's going to be violent conflict. There is going to be physical interaction. And I think that contemporary Aikido has strayed somewhat among those people that feel that they can handle chaos with peace. And I don't think that that's necessarily true. You can try to negotiate as much as possible to avoid the conflict, but once the physical conflict starts, and it may not be your decision to cross that line, it may be completely out of your control, somebody who decides they are going to be physically violent. At that point, intervention is necessary to reestablish control with the minimal amount of collateral damage. Let's put it that way. And I did want to mention something about the one punch death, because this is something that has been a thing, especially among people who maybe they've got a little bit of boxing background, they're a good striker, they're strong, or they just luck out and they hit that 1 in 100 knockout shot. It's not the shot that kills the person. It's when their unconscious body falls back and they hit their head on a door frame or on the concrete. That's when the brain injury and the cracked skull and the brain injury happens. Right. And so even though all you did is, knock somebody cold, if they were standing or they're on a bar stool and they fall off onto their head, that's where the manslaughter thing comes in. And, maybe there's a way that you can strike and knock somebody out and then catch their body before they hit a steel rail or something with their head. But to me, this is where once with Aikido or with Judo or with an art that has a throw, if you grab a hold of somebody and you go to throw them and you can decelerate their fall so they don't slam into the ground, now you have at least a measure of control over their body, so you can alter the outcome. Whereas, I don't know if you're talented enough to kick somebody in the head or you punch somebody in the head and you knock them cold, they're out of your control now. They fall down, they stumble, fall downstairs. I mean, there's your manslaughter issue, much less when there's cameras all over the place like there is now. All you got to do is one person catches that on their phone and your goose is cooked. Like, you can't, there's really no getting out of that. So that's where I see those. I wanted to mention that too, about the level of control that I think a civilian art is focused on, that a military art or a combative's art is not. So I want to throw that in there.
Yeah, I mean, a battlefield is not the same thing as walking down the street of, on Main Street, USA, even though some cities may seem like they're a battlefield. The rules of engagement, so to speak, are going to be quite different. And there's nothing wrong with learning combatives, but there's nothing wrong with any of it. I mean, I think you learn it all. That's better. But I think that people who, and I've dealt with these people being a firearms instructor for concealed carry in my state, and by jokes people make or the comments they say or the questions they ask, it's almost like they're itching to get in a gunfight. And
I'd say the same thing of people that do a lot of knife training. They're carrying a deadly weapon, and it can really only be used for one thing, which is to physically harm somebody, injure them, or kill them, i.e. the deadly weapon.
Yeah, and it's what I tell people is that the criminal justice system, there's no justice in the criminal justice system. What you get is a system, and if you get put on that conveyor belt, and that's what it's like, you have no control about when you're going to get off, where you're going to get off, and that conveyor belt dumps into the state prison. It's just whether or not you get off, and before that. So, and those are things people don't think about, and I think that people ought to think about that. But we go back to reimagining a dojo. If we choose a martial art, I think the paying public are going to want to learn fighting skill. They're going to want to know that there is practical application and practical use for what they're learning, and it's not just dance, because people can go to dance class. People can go to yoga class. And I know there are different types of Tai Chi, but you talk about, old people in the park Tai Chi or at the Y. People can go do that if they want slow movements to work on their balance and stuff. And those are all great things. But if your so-called martial art is really just essentially a dance class in a gi, well, then I don't think that that's a martial art at all. And I'm sure
the martial flavored exercise program is really what it's
exactly
similar to a Taibo or something like that.
Now, there is the caveat I'll put out there is that if that's what you're telling people you're doing, that's perfectly fine too, as long as you're honest with people about what you're teaching. Sure. It's I think that if we just talk about Aikido, is that all of my episodes about martial arts, the Aikido episodes get the most listens. And I think the reason is because nobody knows what it is, and everybody has a different idea of what it is. And
including people that practice Aikido.
Well, that's right. And, I mean, that is way true. And you have a perspective. David Valadez at Ascension Center in Santa Barbara County, California, has a perspective. Christopher Hine in Fresno, California, has a perspective. John Thompson in Denton, Texas, has a perspective. Oliver Martinez in Keller, Texas, has a which is pretty close with John Thompson. Everybody has a little bit different perspective. But I think that if you're going to hang a shingle on a dojo and call it a martial art, you had better actually impart some practical fighting skills. Now, look, every martial art has a limitation. I think Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is really the best thing out there overall. But we do know, even though people don't wish to accept it, is that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu has its limitations too.
Mm-hmm.
It is very much designed for a 1-versus-1 encounter.
Mm-hmm.
And once you get 1-versus-2 or 1-versus-3, I mean, you're in a hurt locker, and except for exceptional martial
Mm-hmm.
artists who are out there too. And on
Mm-hmm.
the internet, everybody raises the exception, and that's
Right.
it's an exception for a reason. So I mean,
Mm-hmm.
even BJJ has its limitations. Aikido has limitations,
Mm-hmm.
and American Kempo Karate has limitations. Everything has a limitation. Boxing has a limitation attached to it. Western wrestling, which I think is the king of martial arts,
Mm-hmm.
um, everything has a limitation to its application. So, um, for somebody who were to establish a dojo, it's like, well, which martial art am I going to teach or principally feature? And then, I need to be sure, as the dojo owner, for example, which I don't own one, but if I were, that people who pay money to come get something practical out of it
Mm-hmm.
as well. I mean, I think that's very, very important. And so, these are things that that really have to be thought about in depth. And I think, I don't want to beat up on Aikido, but Aikido is too often, the people who teach it are the people who, if you look at them, they're not physically fit.
Mm-hmm.
They may either be under muscled or overweight. The top knot, it's all about peace, and this is how they talk. And look, if that's what you're going to tell people you're going to teach, is a very soft, so-called martial art that's really more like you said, a dance-based fitness class. Great, as long as you're honest. But you can't tell people that you're teaching them a practical martial art, because frankly, at least in my opinion, you're not. So I mean, once you pick a martial art, then I think you have to decide that you're going to give the paying public something that is useful and practical.
And I think that's the downside of, or the double edge of the sword of using the term martial art, because it creates, even though you may have your own definition, or the instructor or the dojo or the school has its own definition of what it wants to teach, if you use the term martial art, the average person has an image in their head, an expectation that, yes, I will learn how to deal with somebody that wants to slap me or hit me or grab me or assault me. I'll have an answer for that. And an example of that would be back when Taibo was big. It was a karate flavored exercise program. But when you look at the people that did it, and you're like, what do you love about it? And like, well, I feel like if somebody attacked me, I could punch them, because they've punched in the air and they kicked in the air and they've done all these exercises that look like fighting, that they will be prepared when a fight actually happens. Well, I think that expectation was a false one. Just because you can do, kick exercises and punch exercises, and you don't actually hit targets, you don't move, work against a moving assailant, you don't ever have a punches thrown at you, you feel like you're going to be a tough guy or girl, but you don't find that out until you got somebody who's actually trying to control you. Like, to me, that experience is necessary, not just imagining what it would be or focusing on a small part of a martial art, which is the movement and getting your body conditioned. And yeah, those are important. Those are very important, but not applying it, that's the issue. And when you look at an instructor that weighs 350 pounds, clearly out of shape, you're left to wonder, like, what are they teaching if their training has not helped keep them in shape, or having a fit, somewhat athletic body. And age, you can't use age as an excuse, because there are some 60, 70-year-olds that are in fine physical condition. For their age, they are very capable. So, to have a fit and active training session means you have to have a fit and active body. So if you see an instructor that is obese and in horrible shape, now that leads you to the conclusion, well, your class must not be very, active. Now you get somebody like, old wrestlers like Billy Robinson. You saw him, teach, and he had a cane. He could barely walk, big guy. Somebody like that's done their time, and he's still
Right.
coaching, but his body's so wrecked up that he can't be fit and active, which in my opinion, this is also a consideration that formed how I want to train. I don't want to train so hard that by the time I get to be 70 years old, I can't walk, I can barely get up, I can barely move from one end of the room to the other. I've got a cane, maybe I'm in a wheelchair, like, because you can take training to that level where, and everybody I run into that's older has regretted how hard they trained when they were younger because their knees are shot, their joints are all tight and hard. They were so hard on their body. Now it's not an art that leads to a healthy overall long life. So
Yeah.
I think that definition is in there too. So you need the live play, you need the active, try to get as close as you can to the environment that you want to succeed in, but not so hard that you're now paying a dear price for it, whether you're constantly getting injuries in your training, or that you're now leading to chronic long-term injuries with your joints in your body.
Well, and that brings something up. There's a couple of things kind of in that ballpark about having a dojo, founding one and operating it. A couple of things is that, I did BJJ up until the pandemic happened, and I went to I went to a week long Gracie Gracie. See, I can't even remember. Did not get much sleep last night, so my brain's not firing at all the cylinders. I think about 2 or 3 hours. I'm not at home. I'm not at work. I'm at my father's house. He just got out of the hospital yesterday. So, Gracie, not combatives, but anyway, it's the police jiu-jitsu instructor level 1 course, and I had this young police officer wrench my arms behind my back in a handcuffing drill. Of course, after I told him not to do that, he did it. And so I got torn rotator cuffs, not from that, but it re-injured my already torn rotator cuffs. So then I started in karate, shuri-ryu, not shurin, but shuri-ryu karate. And there was they got a big kids class, and there was a kid in my neighborhood who went to school, who trained there, a little kid, and talking to his dad one day, so Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, man, I think he probably loved that. He said, well, we took him there, and there's like 3 schools in my town, and he said I don't know which one they took him to, but he took him to a school, and the kid didn't like the huggy wuggy martial art.
Is that what he called it?
Around, right? Well, I'm calling it that because it is. I mean, it's up close and personal, and he didn't like that, so he would have a better fit with karate than he did with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. There are people out there, even adults, who, if they went to a BJJ school and they saw people rolling on the mats, are simply going to get turned off, grossed out, don't want to be that close to somebody, don't want to do that kind of martial art. What is out there that speaks to them? What is out there available for them, for that kid, that adult, that older person who doesn't want to be sweating in each other's eyeballs? And that's not wrong for somebody to, it doesn't bother me, but it's not wrong for somebody to be bothered by it. So are you going to feature something that's going to be an alternative to that? And, that's another consideration about the martial art. And that's going to inform how you're going to market the dojo as well, to be quite honest about it. But we go back to like Taibo. I mean, you can make a case that the increased physical fitness, if somebody diligently did Taibo 5 times a week, that increased physical fitness increases their self-defense quotient. I believe
it does. Absolutely.
All right. Even the mildest Aikido being taught is valuable for self-defense, because in Aikido, you must know how to break fall, and you must know how to roll. If you are pushed down, knocked down, trip and fall down, if you're on uneven terrain and you catch your foot and fall down, you can fall safely, get back on your feet quickly, and depart the area. And that's perfectly fine self-defense. Every martial art, regardless of what it is, there's something somebody can take from it very positively, even if it's just physical fitness. So we have to put that out there, because I think that's being honest about martial arts.
Definitely.
So, you know, if it's you know, if you're establishing a dojo and you're determining what martial art you're going to teach, you really have to also know, we haven't brought it up yet, you have to know your marketplace, and are you going to fill a niche? You know, frankly, if I could find somebody qualified to teach traditional Japanese jiu-jitsu, that would, you know, which I also have trained in the past. I really think that that's pretty awesome. It's hard to find somebody who can teach that anymore.
It is.
But that would be something that if I could get a hold of an instructor, I might, you know, think about taking some capital and opening a dojo.
Sure.
And of course, there's all sorts of considerations, because you do need people to come in if you want to be able to keep the lights on and pay the rent. But so maybe we've beaten a dead horse of what to teach. I think that those are big considerations of which martial art, how are you going to teach it, and are you looking to fill a niche for people who may go to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? And I live my city's about 50,000 people, a little bit more, and there's 3 schools. Well, there's 5 if you count one of the black belt academies that teach like 5 different martial arts. You can find it in my town, easy driving distance, but there are people who don't want to do that for the reasons we've already mentioned. There is a judo school in my town, but if you're of a certain age and those throws, and this guy's he's teaching Olympic athletes or future Olympic athletes, you know,
competitors. Competitive judo is very athletic and very hard on the body.
Very hard on the body. And so, do you choose a martial art that's going to fill a niche? Are you going to attract the older crowd? Are you going to attract the people who don't want to be huggy wuggy on the ground, sweating in each other's eyeballs? Are you going to fill that niche? And if you do fill a niche, and that's fantastic, I think we owe it to the paying public to give them, if you're going to call it a martial art, to doggone give them a martial art. Again, having said that, just physical fitness alone, or just knowing how to break, fall, and roll alone, can be tremendously useful in a real self-defense encounter if it goes connected.
I've had several students that have said their ability to roll has saved them from the hospital.
Yeah, I remember, just as an aside, when I was in college, I was in the judo club at college, and I was home in my hometown one weekend. A buddy of mine, we were both veterans. I'd been in the military before college, and so was he. We were out running, and I stepped in a hole, and I judo rolled right back onto my feet. If I didn't know how to do that, I would have been hurt.
Yeah.
The hole consumed my entire foot, past the ankle, and I fell. If I didn't know how to judo roll, and I rolled right back onto my feet, and then we just kept on going. And that, I've never forgotten that, because that's how useful that stuff can be. And if somebody knocks you down or pushes you down, or you just trip and fall down, that is worth its weight in gold, just knowing that stuff. So, there are benefits to everything somebody can train. Well, everybody should train in martial arts, even if it's just if you're an old person and want the slow motion, old what I call old person Tai Chi, working on balance and things like that, that's fine too, because you'll be great takeaways from that, because you improve your balance, your general fitness, your flexibility, coordination, things like that. All are very, very important, especially as we age. And then, so if we've beaten what kind of martial art to teach, if we've beaten it into the ground already, then perhaps we ought to look at how we, design the dojo, because I think sometimes people can walk into a dojo and it looks like it's a quasi-religious location. And, well, there's nothing wrong with that either, but I think it turns a lot of people off.
Yeah. And I think, having visited many, many dojos, I've seen the whole spectrum between, it looks like the corner of somebody's basement all the way up to, it looks like the Japanese embassy. And, even to the point where I visited a dojo like this, and nobody speaks above a hushed tone. There's no excess conversation. like it's very Catholic churchy, and because my grandmother was Catholic, so I remember as a child going to a lot of Catholic mass, and how solemn and quiet and just the atmosphere was not congenial, what one might say. Wasn't hostile, but it was very formal, and I think that's one of the things I love about the martial arts is the bonds that you build with the people that you train with. And that bond includes enjoying training together, even to the point where you laugh because you can't believe how easy you just got dumped, or how weird that throw was because you didn't feel like you got thrown. You just kind of were maneuvered around and suddenly you're flying through the air. I find those moments tremendously joyful. And so I express that with smiling and laughing and enjoying myself. Not to say that it's, like a clown show or a comedy act or anything, but it's a sense of wonder where when somebody does even a technique, that what they're going to do and they pull it off really well, like that was amazing. But you go to a school where it's very solemn and you're not supposed to communicate. You're not supposed to talk with your training partner. You're not supposed to have that joyful attitude. And I always remember, Morihei's words of, something about train with joy. I always took that to heart, and I like that. I like it when my students do that. I like it when they're thrilled and they're excited and having fun. I think you learn more when you are having fun than when you feel like you're under stress. You have to be, have to mind yourself. You can't speak. Like, to me, those are all learning limiters. I think that's just my observation, but.
Well, just to say this, it comes to mind a couple of things. Yes, I agree with everything you've said. Look, can I cuss on your show?
You may.
All right. Just because I think everybody has a similar image in their mind, probably, of a dojo. You mentioned, corner of somebody's basement to a Japanese embassy. There's nothing wrong with tradition. There's nothing wrong with cultural artifacts
Etiquette.
and cultural etiquette, but I can only speak for myself, and presumably for you too, is that I'm not fucking Japanese. I'm an American.
Yep.
And the excessive formality. And look, here's what I've studied in my life. Judo. Now, I'm not good at any of them. I will admit that. I'm a dabbler. I've studied judo. And I'm going to try to do it in order.
Mm-hmm.
I've studied Shotokan karate. I've studied.
I did too.
Aikido.
Mm-hmm.
I've studied Aikido again. I've studied. Oh no, I got it out of order. I studied Japanese Jiu-Jitsu. Then I studied Aikido again. Then I studied Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for 2 solid years, and I studied Shuri-Ryu karate for a year post-pandemic, and I could go. Then I had knee surgery. Anyway, it's just hell getting older. But so I've studied all those things. It is a complete turn. This is just my personality. It's a complete turnoff to me to go in a place and you're hushed. You have that church, that almost ecclesiastical feeling. I won't even say church, but ecclesiastical feeling, and it's extremely formal. You're not supposed to talk to your training partner. You're not supposed to talk to the instructor unless the instructor talks to you first. To me, that does the student a complete disservice. If they're an American. Now, look, we're a pretty loose society, and I'm not saying we should be libertine in the dojo. Don't get me wrong, but the excessive formality, to me, it's masking something. Either it masks something that the instructor is lacking, or it's masking something that the curriculum is lacking, or the dojo itself is lacking. It's a mask. I will tell you, it relates you an experience also about how things are taught. When I'm being when a technique is being demonstrated to me, because I'm not very good at proprioception. I like to go through the motion. So if we're doing a high block and I'm in the instructor's demonstrating and I'm watching and I'm doing this,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I'm trying to implant the movement into my head based on what I'm looking at and what I'm being told.
Mm-hmm.
I did that one time in that karate school. The last one I went to, and the Sheehan is fantastic. It was one of his underlings, and
Mm-hmm.
he looked at me and he yelled, "I show, you watch."
Mm.
Well, I'm a student. It's not my school. I just went along with it.
Mm-hmm.
Stuck in my head. That is a horrible way to try to teach. I showed, you watch. It's very apparent what I'm doing is I'm mimicking what's being demonstrated, and
Mm-hmm.
people learn in different ways. And there's this rote, really excessively Japanese way of doing things. And another thing, if we're going to I will knock on Aikido as some of the instructors is that,
Mm-hmm.
because it comes from Japan, you don't have to be so doggone Japanese about it. Know your audience, know your student body. If your student body are Americans, damn it, you have to teach in a way that actually gets the information across to that person, or else you're just in my opinion, you're just taking their money and not giving them their money's worth. I know there are people watching and listening to this podcast who vehemently disagree with that, but that's my position. If I were a school owner, like I said, if I open an Aikido dojo, I'm not qualified to teach it. I'd be a student, but I would have parameters that no instructor would work for me unless they agree to these parameters, because I want to give value to the people who show up there, given their time. We can get everything in life back. We can't get time back. They're giving their time and they're giving their money, and they're turning themselves over to the instructor to learn something. So there's something owed, and it's not the other way around. That's another thing. I am Supreme Sensei Shihan Shodan, whatever, and therefore you are here to worship me.
There comes a time when etiquette and protocol, which really is just ritual, can go too far. You're spending more time in ritual than you are in the substance part. And to me, the substance is the teaching. And I did a whole episode on when etiquette in the dojo goes too far. And that's where you start getting the cult-like atmosphere and vibe from a group. Now, in putting together a group, what I've noticed over the years is there are entire groups that have been built on the heavy protocol, etiquette, ritual thing, because there are people that like that part. That's what they're drawn to. They somehow feel that participating that is what they want to do, which for them is fine. But to me, that's different. And I'd say if you go down that road to its ultimate end, what you end with is the Japanese tea ceremony, where they spend 4 hours in a ritual to make tea, and it doesn't even matter about what the tea is. It just matters about the bows and the ritual and all of the movements and going through making tea. But at the end of the day, what about the tea? You know what I mean? But it's not about the tea for that. So if as its own interest thing, that's one thing. But in terms of a martial art now, to me, that distracts from, don't call that a martial art, call it something else. It may have come from a martial art, but it's different.
Well, we've all heard the phrase "less is more." You can do that stuff, but don't overdo it. And look, we're speaking about commercial dojos, private dojos that are non-commercial. I'm not even referring to them at all, but a commercial dojo. A little bit goes a long way. Like Chad Lyman he's a police jiu-jitsu guy out there. As he says, train a little, a lot. Train a little bit, do it a lot. Maybe you got 20 minutes one day, and the next day you got 30, the next day you got 20, but at least you're getting 3 days in a row. You're training a little, a lot, and then on and on and on as the days go by. So yeah, you want to have, if you're teaching traditional Japanese art, you want to have some of those cultural aspects. And yes, it does attract people to that. But I think there's a lot of schools that overdo it. And it brings to mind, over the top is the comedian Matt Page,
Mm.
who's down in Albuquerque, who's a Kenpo black belt, and I think he's probably a BJJ purple belt by now. But he plays a character about the self-important sensei,
Mm.
Master Ken.
Oh yeah. Yep.
He's the comedian who plays Master Ken, and comedian slash actor slash
Yeah, he's
writer
great.
slash yeah.
Master Clint is hilarious.
But I mean, if you walked into enough martial arts schools, you've met Master Ken. Really quite self impressed, and so I mean, anyway, I just threw that out there because we see these things. If you dabble enough like me, or you're a career martial artist like many of the people like yourself and many of the people who watch and listen to your podcast. So I think that I think that it's important not to overdo the ceremonial stuff. Yes, there's a place for it, and it's necessary in some respects. Like even in I have trained that.
Lost you for a second. Go ahead and repeat that sentence.
Well, I mean, I've been to one BJJ school, don't bow at all. Another one bows, but it's rather limited, and it just depends on the school. You want to give a little bit of that if it's a traditional Japanese martial art, but this isn't Japan, and your clientele is not going to be Japanese. And that's just my perspective, and I know that reasonable minds can differ, and people have different perspectives. So I think.
Let me address that, because you brought up, I think, what's a great idea, and that is, and like you said, we've all seen the Master Ken. We've seen the instructor with the massive ego, and his group is there to basically be his followers. It's the cult of personality, and that's something that I think, as somebody gains skill and talent and ability, they will always have newer people drawn to them who are amazed by what they can do, and will kind of shower, admiration on them. And it can be very easy for your ego to start eating that up. And I think that, because I've looked at many practice groups, both within Aikido and with other martial arts, and been with them and seen it time and time again. To me, the safeguard for that is to have the focus of saying, I want the people I train to be as good or better than I am, and I will not rest until they are. Because that tends to put your ego aside, where your ego, when it's allowed to run, will say, I am better than all my students. I have to be better than them. I have to show them that I am better than them all the time, because that's how I gain their respect. And by their respect, that's when they keep paying me, and they want to keep coming back, because, they're paying me, the guru, to impart this wisdom on them. And where I've seen it really go off the rails is when the instructor starts to become, when he gets students that have been following him for a while and start understanding his lessons, he starts to become obscure, to sort of keep them confused about, well, you're not there yet. You'll understand this more if you train more, but they make it so that the lesson's not clear, or the principle that they're trying to convey is not clear. It's obscure, so they have a hard time figuring it out, to kind of keep them in the payment loop of, no, you haven't gotten to where I am yet. You have to keep going. You have to keep paying your tuition. You have to keep coming back. And it winds up being this really weird feel. But a good instructor, and I've run into a few of these, and they truly are, jewels among gems, when they say, I'm going to teach my students everything I know, and they come back and will say, I can take, and with somebody that something I took 5 years to learn, I can teach them in 1, because I've now learned how to teach better. I've learned how to convey the lessons better. I've learned how to, they've improved their teaching and instruction, just as they've improved their martial art and their understanding, and can convey it. Then they get them up to speed, and now the rising tide raises all the boats. It raises the instructor, it raises the students, who now start feeding the instructor their own insights. Because I have a tough time putting a ratio to this, but I think more than half of what you learn as a martial arts student is not what the instructor tells you, and where you memorize it and you just do exactly what he tells you. his description or his demonstrations help you get kind of close, and then you start seeing the reality part. You start seeing what makes your martial art work for you, and it might be a little different from him or a little different from other students. To me, that's why we are martial artists, not martial scientists. A science is absolutely, it's either right or wrong. Chemistry, biology, it's either machining, it's precise. And art is open to interpretation by the different artists. And then we're not all the same. We all don't use the same exact process. We might use the same principles. We might
That's right.
be inspired by one another, but even if you and I both learned Aikido from the same people, our Aikido is going to look a little different because we're built differently. Our minds are different. Our spirits are different. How we interpret things is a little different. It's not going to be cookie cutter the same. And so, but back to that ego thing, as an instructor, I think, and this was my biggest concern when I opened a dojo, was because we had this happen a couple of times at my dojo that I trained in. People that came in that did want to learn how to hurt somebody, like basically a thug or a kind of a bad seed, and this goes back over 100 years of, within the traditional martial arts, it's don't teach people of poor character because you're giving them physical capability. You want to have your students be of good character. They are strong, but they are virtuous, not strong and, thug like. But I wanted to have, my dojo, I wanted to set the tone, and that part of it comes from what you mentioned earlier. Like, what does the dojo look like? What is it when you walk in the door? You get an immediate first impression. Like, how do you make that first impression good? I don't want it to look like the corner of my garage with junk all over the place, and it smells like an old tennis shoe, and it's filthy. I want it clean. I don't want it to look like the Japanese embassy either, where it's intimidating to people. I want it to look like the laboratory. This is where we go to study our art. And I want the energy, not just the stuff that's in the inanimate objects, but in the people, to be positive. I want anybody that steps in there to feel like everybody here is there to help me get better. We're not there to humiliate each other, or we're hiding our vulnerabilities, because that mat is truth. When you step on the mat, there's no lying about anything. Your character will come out. There is vulnerability for everybody that's on the mat, including the instructor. If somebody thinks, well, I'm the instructor, I'm not vulnerable, it's the students that are vulnerable. Oh no, the instructor is very vulnerable. Your flaws will show. And if your ego says, I can't show any flaws, I can't show any weakness, you're going to have a very stressful time, because it will come out. Your students will see it too. Don't ever think that they won't. They will, but they should not be frightened into not saying anything. And that's where I like having a positive energy, where, say if I'm showing something or I show a flaw, I'll even call out, I just screwed this up. I stepped in the wrong place, and look what happened. I was out of balance. Here was, learn from my mistake, because I'm trying to learn from my mistakes still. There's no amount of training that you can do that will make you immune from making your mistakes. You should be experienced enough to notice them. You probably will. If you don't, you're not much of an instructor. But how you deal with them, and I like using honesty to deal with those things with my students, to say, you know what, I'm going to teach you. I'm even going to teach you the wrong thing. How about that? I'm going to teach you to do stuff incorrectly, because my caveat is I might in a month, 6 months, a year, find out what I was doing could be done better. So be ready for me to say, you know what I showed you last year or 6 months ago, we're going to do it different now, because this works better than what I was doing before. Because even as an instructor, we're always learning, always absorbing, always evolving and changing. And I think that concept right there is something that really bothers the people that look to their art to be, I want it to be set. I don't want it to change. I don't want it to evolve. I want it to be so that I can learn it and I can grasp it, and it doesn't ever change from underneath me. I won't ever have to update what I've learned how to do. And that's the feeling that I get from a lot of people in all manner of traditional martial arts. Why should I have to learn a different type of a strike? Why should I have to learn? Because I've already spent years learning this other thing. Why should I have to abandon that and change it to something else? And if the answer is because it works better this way, it's more efficient, it's uses less energy, higher chance of success, lower risk of failure. To me, those are the answers to those questions. But, you know, in my few years of doing this podcast and being on the Aikido, the martial side forum, I've run into a lot of pushback and in other forums of why change Aikido? There's nothing wrong with it. You know, well, so it's perfect. That part never really, that seems to have a logical flaw that's plain for anybody to see. What art can claim that it's perfect? What art can claim that it is beyond evolution or advancement? And I mean, even Morihei Ueshiba said that, and I'm going to paraphrase this, but like there are no techniques in Aikido. Aikido is always evolving. It will always continue to evolve. And I've only scratched the surface. Well, was that principle embraced by successive generations of Aikido instructors? I think a lot of them have lost their way from that concept. And I think that's an important concept.
Well, it is, and we're coming up against a hard stop because I'm my father's caregiver today. But I do want to say something. Go back to training with joy. Look, if you have a dojo and your training's not fun, why would people want to keep going there? You know, and if you look at the sport martial arts, there are hard ass coaches out there, but it's usually it's usually fun. Go watch videos by Teach Me Grappling, Brian.
That's a great channel. Yep.
It's a fantastic channel. He's not nothing wrong with the Marine Corps drill instructor. I'm a Marine, and but still, that's not what it's like in his school. At least what's been on the YouTube. So you got to train with joy. It's got to be fun, or else why do people want to spend their time and money? Another thing is I just want to get this out. If you want to compete in the marketplace against karate and Brazilian jiu-jitsu and other martial arts, and you have a commercial Aikido dojo, ditch the hakama. It's not necessary. This isn't Japan. There aren't any samurais anymore, not even in Japan. Ditch the hakama. Just go with a regular gi.
It also makes teaching harder because your students should be able to see what your legs are doing. If they can't see what your legs are doing, they have a harder time learning. It's practical.
That's right. And then let's talk about instructors. An instructor's goal should be to make their students at least as good as they are, if not better. Or else, why are you teaching? Why are you teaching? Maybe you don't have the ability as a teacher to make somebody better than you, but you can make them as good as you. You have that ability because you're at this point. But that should be the goal of a teacher.
And when your student gets that impression, when you tell them that tells them, I have faith in you as a student.
That's right. And also
that builds them.
And that's where you get the instructor who's, you must address me as Super Shodan, Shihan, Sifu, Guru. No. Those are the instructors people ought to run away from. But that's what I think. That's an instructor's obligation to at least endeavor to bring the students up to their level, if not beyond. And so I think these are very, very important aspects. Then tradition. Look, I think that's what's harmed Aikido, is this idea that you have to teach exactly like the founder taught. How many iterations have we been through? I know that Ueshiba died in 1968, or is it later than that?
Yeah, it was late 60s. Yeah.
So yeah, it's not like there aren't people who are alive who knew him, but it's like how many permutations. It's like making a copy on a Xerox machine. Should you make a copy of 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 a copy? What's the resolution by the time you get to that last copy? Well, the resolution is crap. And that's what people, when they stick so close to tradition, because this is what the founder did or founder said, and the founder himself said, it's got to, it's got to grow and evolve. But that's what they do. So what's the resolution coming out the other end? It's like that, that re-Xeroxed image until it's just, it's barely discernible gray on a sheet of paper. And that's why a martial art has to be able to grow. It actually has to be able to grow and evolve. Doesn't mean you got to change it wholesale, but there's nothing wrong with if this technique. I mean, what's the objective? I mean, what's the objective of the technique? So, I mean, if it has a specific objective, there's, the golf swing. Well, there is the perfect golf swing, and nobody achieves perfection, but that doesn't stop people from achieving the level of being a PGA or LPGA pro, which are only like 120 people every year on each of those tours. So the 220 best golfers on planet Earth that year, none of them have exactly the same swing. But, so this whole idea of it's got to be mechanically exactly, no, because, you're way taller than I am, Tristan. So your Aikido would be different from what I would be able to demonstrate, as you mentioned before. And so the art does have to evolve. It has to take in. I mean, look at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Did the Gracie family say, oh, you ruined BJJ because you're doing leg locks? Nope. It's not what happened. So the martial art can evolve, and it's the right thing to do. And we can argue about how and which direction, but still it can't be so wedded to tradition that it becomes that Xerox copy of a Xerox copy 400 times removed, because then you don't get good resolution on the other end. So I would say those things for me, and I wish I could stay longer. I love this conversation, but we're now 1 hour and 15 minutes plus some seconds. And so I'm really going to have to push on. So if you don't mind, please, I think we ought to maybe start wrapping it up.
Yeah, well, let's do that. And before we go, I would like you to describe your new book, which just came out. I purchased a copy and I've been so busy, I haven't even gotten into it, but I would like you to describe it for our readers. I see it's on the shelf behind you. So describe the book that you just wrote. I think the listeners would probably be interested in it.
Yeah, I did a podcast episode at invitation of Randall Davis of Kung Fu Conversations podcast to discuss what connects the ancient warrior and modern warrior. And I did a podcast episode and ended up figuring that, I'm going to turn this into a book. And I did. It's called On Warriorship, A Guide for Your Warrior Path. And the book is just that. It's a guide for somebody's warrior path, somebody who wants to learn about warriorship, somebody who wants to begin a warrior path, somebody who's on the warrior path and wants to improve the warrior path. And then people like me who are, I would say old warriors can recalibrate themselves to warriorship. And it's written, as I stated on the back of the book and inside, it's written concisely in plain, simple language to make it available to a wide audience. And you can find the book on Amazon.com. You can find the hardcover, the paperback, and in the ebook on Amazon. You can find the paperback at BarnesandNoble.com, on ThriftBooks.com, and several other booksellers out there. And I encourage people who are interested in warriorship to buy the book. And it's got you can see the Spartan helmet and and of course the U.S. Helmet there. Together with a sword going through it, but you don't have to be. If you look at the cover, it might be, well, I'm not a military guy. No, it's for everybody who wants to walk the warrior path. So I encourage people to log on to Barnes and Noble or Amazon and take a look at it, and if interested, buy one and read one. And I hope people enjoy it, and I hope you do too when you get around to reading it.
Yes, and I'm looking forward to digging into it. I've just been this last couple of weeks, I've been running like crazy, but I got my copy, and I'm thrilled to get into it when I can sit down for a few minutes. So, well, Todd, thank you very much for joining me today. This has been a very fun conversation. I feel like we've only scratched the surface of it, but
we really have.
There are many considerations of how do you do a group, or even like I said, titling this Reimaging Aikido, or reimagining your training of. Maybe you've gone through and are teaching for a while, and maybe it's time to re-examine what you're doing to alter things a little bit. Can you improve them a little bit? Can you make the energy in your dojo feel a little better, make it feel more welcoming, or just, reinvigorate your group with a slight alteration to whether it's attitude or your practice, how you do your practices, having a little bit of live work. I found that my students love live play once I've given them the groundwork for what they should be doing within that live play and start making things work for them. And I found students love it. I've run into a lot of dojos that they seem to be afraid of live play, but if it's structured well and you set your students up for success with it, they will have a blast doing it. They'll really enjoy it.
Yeah. And, we've had to cancel this recording so many times. I didn't want to do it again today. I appreciate you having me on. I always enjoy talking to you, and I hope we can do this again. I know, you're a busy guy running your own business and et cetera, et cetera. And, we all have a lot of things going on, but I would love to be back on your show or have you on the Dirt Wasp podcast sometime. Because
absolutely. I look forward to that. Both of those.
Yeah, because I really enjoy talking with you, and when we've talked offline on the phone and things like that, I've really enjoyed it, and I appreciate you having me on, and folks watching and listening, buy the book. There it is, shameless marketing, right there.
That's right. There you
shameless
go.
Marketing.
Yep, go check it out. Well, thanks very much again, Todd, and have a great rest of your day.
You too. Thank you so very much, and we'll talk again soon.
Yes, we will.
Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this discussion. Stay tuned for more episodes. I've got some great stuff on the way very soon. In the meantime, enjoy your training.